Joining us is Laurent Lequeu, financial consultant and writer of the Macro Butler. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Laurent.
That's my pleasure to be on your show.
Thanks
to join Geopolitics.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I discovered you recently on Substack. You're on X, you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, and if you want to tell us a bit about the work that you're doing with Macro Butler.
Well, the Macro Butler Substack look at the world through the lens of the business cycle. So what we try to do at the Macro Butler and by writing the Substack is to give a view of the global business cycle and help investor and people to understand how they should position their portfolio in the current environment. As well, we are looking at geopolitics because we think that geopolitics and finance are interlinked and move together. And we are big believer in cycles, meaning that we also look at the war cycle because here, once again, war cycle and business cycle move together in general.
Yeah, and I definitely have questions on that. And anything you want to add about your background? I think you have a long history, yes, in financial consulting and so forth.
Well, I've been working in financial markets for around 27 years. So I'm originally from Belgium, then moved to Singapore around 12 years ago. And I launched the Macro Butler and my independent financial consultant service almost 1.5 years ago.
Okay, very good. And I think I'll start with the big question of the day to get your thoughts. I know you've been writing about it. The tariffs. What's your thought as to the macro, the big picture? What's going on with America's tariffs and this economic war against the rest of the world?
Well, I would think that we have to take a step back. So if we look what happened since World War II, in fact, the US have been dominating the world as the US imperialism spread after World War II. This has come with a major development is that US also was spreading the free trade, but the free trade that was spread after the 1970s was mostly to benefit the US multinational because the US multinational were facing and are still facing a very tight regulation and high level of taxes at home. So these US multinational went overseas to produce cheap goods which were imported into the US, and the US pay for this in US dollar. And foreign countries use the US dollar mostly to pay for their energy since oil was denominated in US dollar since recently. So, I mean, if you look back at history and economic theory, the comparative advantage of Ricardo show that every country should specialize in one of the goods where it has a comparative advantage. The issue in the free trade that we have been, let's say, since the 1980s, is that the US didn't really have any comparative advantage in anything. So the only comparative advantage that the US had was to issue US dollar to pay for cheap goods produced overseas. So fast forward to 2025 and the tariff, I think that what President Trump tried to do, in fact, is to rebalance the global trade. And he also understands that geopolitics has changed, especially since 2022 and the war between Ukraine and Russia. So he also understands that this war has brought together Russia, China, and India, and this is a real threat for the US. So by imposing tariff, in fact, he tries to weaken this bloc of Russia, China, and India. And to be honest, I think that he won't be successful because, as I said, the US has no more any comparative advantage in most of the industries. And so it will be very difficult for companies to relocate their production in the US, even under tariff. So I would think that, in fact, what this tariff will end to produce is that to accelerate the de-dollarization of the world. And this will bring back the US as the fortress America that was developed under Monroe, meaning that the US will try to live kind in an autarcic environment and will still have to import cheap goods for most of its needs.
So you answered some of my questions already. So I have different guests on with different opinions, and I'm asking myself, will Trump and the U.S. succeed in reindustrializing America? You don't think so, and I can see them not having success. It's a massive undertaking that will take many, many years, and what seems more likely is what you explained. I think what would, if we continue down this route, America doesn't reindustrialize, the dollar, is de-dollarized, the world is de-dollarized. What do you think America would look like? So its global footprint would shrink. Do you think? Would that mean its military footprint shrinks as well as its financial footprint? And did you say that you feel North America becomes more autocratic? And what about the quality of life, the standard of living for Americans?
Well, there's a lot of to unpack here. I will think first that, it depends of what we are talking about around reindustrialization. I don't think that the US will ever produce socks or shoes anymore in the US. There's no point for Nike to restart producing its shoes in the US. And that's why the tariffs are not really a good solution to the problem, because it will always be cheaper for Nike to produce shoes in Vietnam or in Bangladesh rather than in the US. I think that the focus of the US reindustrialization will be on the key industries, probably like semiconductor, like this kind of industries, which are needed for what is coming in terms of the AI revolution. The US is blessed of being energy independent. So what the US needs now, I would say, to go ahead with its AI revolution is to reindustrialize around the supply chain of the semiconductor and everything around the data center. So I think that we need to make a distinction between, I would say, cheap goods, which will never ever be produced in the US, and the higher end goods like semiconductor, where there's a likelihood that for, I would say, strategic security, the US will reindustrialize in these industries. Regarding the impact of this tariff on the influence of the US across the world, I think that, we have already seen since 2022 and the war between Ukraine and Russia that it's dangerous for many countries to own US dollar asset, because the US dollar has been weaponized, has been used as a weapon when the US and the Western world has been frozen Russian asset. So clearly, this has mean that the US impact over the Eastern world, or what I call the global South, has already diminished, and that's why we have seen the gold price rising since 2022. It's not because suddenly investors have found that gold is more shiny than before. It's because a lot of central bank in this global South, or even private investor and institutional investor in the global South, have understood that they cannot trust the US, and that US treasuries or US dollar assets are not a safe asset for them anymore. So they need an asset with no counterparty risk. They need this anti-fragile asset, which is gold. So I would think that the influence of the US across the world has already diminished after this weaponization of the US dollar. And I guess the tariff, in fact, are going to increase this trend over the next few years. And we will see a shift in the world financial center from the US into the global south. And I mean, what appears to be the next financial center over the next decade would be most probably Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is where the East and the West are still meeting. The Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollar. Hong Kong has been used by China as, I would say, an exit way to trade with the rest of Asia. So I can see that by the end of this decade or early in the next decade, Hong Kong could replace easily New York as the center of the financial world, because, as I said, Hong Kong is where the yuan and the Hong Kong dollar, and alternatively, at least for the time being, the US dollar can be traded kind of relatively freely. So I think that I would think that this is the financial impact of the tariff, is also that I would think that China, India, and Russia will increasingly trade between each other. And since, again, 2022, we have seen that it's not possible for India to buy its oil from Russia and pay in rupee. So, I mean, this is part of the de-dollarization process that we have seen since 2022. We see the countries among the global south trading between each other. And if I come back to the impact of the tariff, in fact, this means that Chinese goods will probably find a market elsewhere than in the US and elsewhere in Europe, because it seems that Western Europe is not really keen to set a deal with China. So I would think that you will see more and more Chinese goods sold in the global south, sold in Africa, sold in Latin America. And again, all this means that we are in a de-dollarization process, because when Chinese goods will be sold in Thailand or in Brazil, they will be mostly settled in yuan or in Brazilian real or in Thai baht, meaning that the long-term impact of this tariff is the de-dollarization of the world, and a move towards probably first a Hong Kong dollar that is finally repegged to the yuan, I would say, by 2032, when the financial center of the world have moved to Hong Kong. But I'm not bearish on the US dollar against other fiat currency, because I mean, the world still owns a lot of debt in US dollar. I mean, especially these global source countries still have a big pile of US dollar denominated debt to reimburse. So, I mean, again, the basic understanding is that if less dollars are produced by the global trade, these countries, these companies, or these countries still need US dollar to reimburse their debt in US dollar. So you will see probably a spike in US dollar against all major fiat currencies. But at the same time, in fact, the dollar will depreciate against the only currency that have preserved across centuries, which is gold. So, I mean, in a few words, we are in a world where the US dollar is rising against other fiat currency, but is depreciating against gold, silver, and other precious metal.
Will you see any drastic changes in the standard of living in America through all this? Do you think it will just more or less stay, or do you think it will decline somewhat?
Well, I guess someone has to fit the bill of the tariff, right? Because at the end of the day, the tariff is just a tax. I mean, it's a tax without being named as a tax. So someone has to fit the bill of the tariff. So there's two possibilities who fit the bill of the tariff. Is it the corporate, but then the margins of these corporates importing cheap goods from overseas into the US will decline. So, I mean, this means that Wall Street will pay the bill, or is it the consumer will have to fit the bill? So I would think that I think that the bill will be fit between the two. So that's why we had a kind of what I call a tariff tantrum over the past 2 weeks, because financial investors start to understand that someone has to pay the bill. And the most obvious for them seems to be that corporate America is going to pay the bill of the tariff. I would think that by some time, prices will go up in the US. It would be very difficult for Americans to find cheap goods at Walmart anymore. So clearly, I would think that the standard of living of the middle class of America will not really improve by the tariff, because what will be also reindustrialized in the US will be mostly done by using automation. I mean, the US, and if you look at what is done in the US today, you look at Amazon warehouse, it's not very labor intensive, it's robot intensive. So I guess that the tariff, and when you will see investment in the US, so even if you see, let's say, a car manufacturing starting in Detroit, I mean, everything will be automated, and you will have much fewer workers than in any other car plants in the world. So I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, as I said, you're gonna reindustrialize using robots, and the middle class workers will have to pay a higher bill at Walmart. So, I mean, all in all, I would say the standard of living of the middle class American will decline, because they will have to fit part of the tariff bill.
Yeah, we had billionaire Lutnick come out and say that robots will replace the cheap labor. Not that he cares really for, in my opinion, most of the middle class. And just one more question on the dollar de-dollarization and the status of the dollar as the world reserve currency. So you kind of outline where that's headed. The center of powers is shifting east, as you said, to Hong Kong. On the podcast in the past, I've had a Warwick Powell, who's a very fascinating thinker and expert, and he published recently on his Substack revisiting the Bancor. So I'm also fascinated in globalism and where some of these trajectories are headed. And so as the dollar loses slowly its stature, there are people talking about, what will replace that? Will anything replace it? Will it be a system of multiple currencies, interoperable? People talk about CBDCs. Warwick brings up, the Bancor, which was basically an idea for a world currency, and he talks about BRICS clear and IMF special drawing rights. Any thoughts on what might happen after the dollar, after the world becomes de-dollarized to a point? Do you think there will be some sort of new system?
Well, first I want to comment on the Lutnick comments. I think that Lutnick was not elected, and the issue that President Trump will have down the road is that those who voted for him will be disappointed by what they can get really from the tariff. So I think that will be very interesting to see how long Lutnick can stay can keep his job by not really taking care of the middle class or the low wages worker. To come back to the dollar, I mean, I personally think that when I look at this global south, there's no really a need for creating a new currency to replace the dollar. I think that if I take the point of view of China, for instance, which is a very mercantilist and a society that that has been based on global trades. I mean, the Chinese have been merchants for forever. I would say that they are ready to trade in in their local currency as well as the local currency of their trade partners. I would think that we are going into a system where all these global south trade between each other, I would say in local currency. I mean, meaning, let's say, if China sell EVs to Thailand, Thailand will pay in yuan or will pay in Thai baht. And you will have probably somewhere in Hong Kong or in Shanghai a way to convert your yuan or your Thai baht against gold, because I think that's the reason that we have seen the PBOC building a gold reserve over the years and keep building this gold reserve, is that at some point they would make sure that their trading partner can convert their yuan or their local currency against gold. Because once again, and if I look from the lens of the global south and I look at how Asia has been built across centuries, I mean, here in Asia, people are used to invest in gold. It's nothing new for them. I mean, parents, grandparents, grandparents have bought gold and have given the gold to their children. So, I mean, gold has been seen as a store of value by retail investor, by institutional investor for many years, and also by central banks for many years. So the shift that we had in 2022 was quite natural for a lot of Asian countries and countries from the global south, since they saw that they cannot trust the US dollar anymore because there's a geopolitical risk of owning US dollar. I mean, they clearly understood that the shift was to gold, physical gold, and also physical silver. I mean, recently the Russian central bank has announced that it's building a strategic reserve of silver. So you can see that I would think that the global south has a long tradition of investing in gold and seeing gold as the anti-fragile asset to own across the business cycle and across centuries. So again, to come back on your question, I don't think that there will be a BRICS currency. I don't think that there's a motivation for the BRICS countries to create this currency. We have seen how the euro has failed in a way. And I think that the BRICS countries are more in this kind of mindset of let's deal between each other in our currency, and let's create probably an exchange or a BRICS bank where you can exchange your currency against gold or against silver or even maybe against oil. I mean, Russia has a very huge reserve of oil and gas. So Russia could contribute to this BRICS bank by giving the possibility to exchange currency against oil and gas.
Let me ask you about China. So I follow a multitude of people. I think this is what we need to do: listen to all sides and then come to our own conclusions. And as guests, I have sometimes eminent pro-Western thinkers, eminent pro-Eastern thinkers, right? And you listen to both sides, and the rah-rah America people are like, China's weak, China's going to collapse, America's going to reindustrialize and be awesome. And then you hear the others when you listen to the East, and they say, the dollar is going to collapse. They're not going to reindustrialize. China is moving at hyper speed with AI and all this tech. What are your thoughts when it comes to China? Who has the upper hand here?
What's the time horizon? No, I mean, joke aside, I think that in China, we know that the government tell the banks which sector they need to allocate money for the development of the country. So, I mean, at the start of the mandate of Xi, the focus was on real estate because China needed to be urbanized. And again, here I would say over the past few years we have seen a change in terms of priority. So it's a reality that the real estate market in China is in a dire situation, but it doesn't mean that China is in a dire situation, because what happened over the past 5 years, I would say, is that the government has told the banks, you need to allocate all your funding to key industries like EVs, like more recently AI, or China just launched airlifting unmanned taxi service. So you can see that in China, that's the difference of the US or the Western world. In the US, to get the financing, you go to Wall Street, you pitch your ID, you do an IPO, or you get a guy from the VC from the Silicon Valley, and then you can start your business in China. The government tell the banks, we need to be the leaders in the EV sector. And then the banks give a lot of funding to BYD, Xpeng, and others. And all the resources are put on this industry. So I would think that if we look at, again, a 10-year time horizon, it's undeniable that when China enters an industry, it can usually do better at a cheaper price than any other country in the world. You look at BYD, you look at DeepSeek recently, you can get a better product usually for half of the price of what is developed in Europe or in the US. So I would think that on a 10-year time horizon, China decision to focus on these key industries is clearly an advantage compared to the Western world. And here also, I think that I would think that from my point of view, China is looking at being in a trade relationship with a country without telling the country which government is good for you or not. So we are not here in terms of China in the imperialistic way of thinking that we have seen in the US or that we have seen in Europe. When China trade with Thailand, China doesn't tell the Thai government or they should run their country. What the interest of China is to sell EVs and to get rice from Thailand, for example. Or when China trade with Brazil, China doesn't tell Brazil, oh, they should run their own country. China sell again some BYDs to Brazil and get some iron ore or some sugar from Brazil. And the relationship between countries stop there. While the US, it's not that I'm against the US or pro-China, but it's a fact that the US, since World War II, has tried to impose its way of living to the rest of the world. You go to any city in the world, you see a McDonald's, you see a Starbucks. It's part of this American imperialism that came with the American dominance in terms of being having the most powerful army in the world, dominating the world with the reserve currency, the US dollar as the reserve currency, and with the need of every country to own US dollar to buy energy in the past. This is going away because, as I said, now any country can buy energy from Russia using their local currency. I mean, we have seen that a group like the Houthis, which doesn't seem very organized, not even a country, an institutional country, can threaten the dominance of the US military in the Middle East. So we see that the US is clearly losing its grip on the world for different reasons, because we have technological development in the aerospace defense sector that you don't need to buy a 30 million jet fighter from Lockheed Martin to fight a war anymore. So I would think again, and here is that we are in a situation where the US is still dominating the world, that's a fact. But also the decision that American took by electing Donald Trump was a decision for US to retreat to the fortress America, meaning that the US will not take care of what's happening in the rest of the world. It's America first. If it's America first for trade, it's also America first in terms of international relationship. And to be honest, the US don't need to intervene in the Middle East. It's China that needs the oil from the Middle East. It's not the US that needs the oil from the Middle East. The US is energy independent and even export LNG to Asia, export LNG to Europe. So I would think that, again, the US is in a trend where it tries to focus back on its own problem. The issue of the US at the end of the day is the regulations in the US, is the tax code in the US. And until this is not fixed, in fact, you will not see a prosperous USA. To get a prosperous and autonomous USA, you need to fix the issue of regulation. You need to fix the issue of the tax code. You need to fix the issue of Medicaid. And this needs a lot of changes that are, I mean, it's very politically difficult to implement all these changes.
And just to add to what you said, they don't just impose McDonald's on foreign countries. They impose presidents and prime ministers, right, through regime change and coups and that sort of thing. And I did want to mention there was a hilarious clip recently where they interviewed, I didn't get his name, but some Chinese guy who's a expert or vice president of a company or related to the government. But they say the British host said China will lose the U.S. market, and what he says isn't incorrect. He responds very forcefully. He says, "We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time there was no U.S. and we survived. If the U.S. wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest." He's not incorrect. And, you know, some of the double standards bother me as an American as well, where we have Vance came out recently, and they say, China can't take Taiwan, and Russia cannot slice off the eastern part of Ukraine. That's against international rules and the rules-based order. But J.D. Vance comes out and says, look, we have no other option. We have to take Greenland. Like, how can they say that with a straight face? Like, no, we're going to take Greenland. You know, what about this rules-based order and democracy, right? And fairness. I mean, just the hypocrisy there. Europe, the old continent. What are your thoughts on Europe?
Well, Europe, I mean, unfortunately, is on the verge of a sovereign debt crisis. And that's why you are seeing all these European leaders cheering for wars, because they know, in fact, that more wars are needed for them to stay in power. And that's why I'm very worried that, in fact, we will see an escalation in the Ukraine-Russian conflict over the next few weeks. I think that Europe is supporting Ukraine and is trying to go into a war, in a direct war with Russia, which is a kind of a suicidal act from my point of view, because the leaders of Europe are clearly desperate for this war. They know, I mean, in Europe, most of the elections have been, I would say, those in power in Europe do not accept what the people of Europe tell them. I take the example of France. I mean, it's almost 1 year that there's not been a stable government. There's kind of a witch hunt around Marine Le Pen because she's the only one who can, I would say, possibly beat Macron at the next presidential election. You look what happened in Germany. The election has been confiscated. I mean, around 25% of Germans have voted for AfD, and AfD have been excluded from the new government. You look at Romania. I mean, the election was cancelled because the candidate who was supposed to win the presidential election was against war, was against NATO. You look at everywhere in Europe, those in power really understand that if there is no war, they will not stay in power for much longer. So the problem of Europe is that I mean, if you think that US has very tight regulation, the regulation in Europe are even tighter. And outside a few goods like Louis Vuitton or some good wine from France or Italy, tell me what Europe is good at producing anymore. I mean, Europe has become a bureaucratic continent where everything is regulated. And in fact, Europe is not favoring creativity. What Europe is doing is just regulating because everyone living around the European Union are just bureaucrats, and bureaucrats live by imposing rules on everything, on I would say the color of the water bottle cap or something like that. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. And to be honest, again here, I would think that Europe will fall into a sovereign debt crisis sooner rather than later. And if you want my top country to be the first one to fall in this situation, is clearly France. So I think that, in fact, in one of the 10 prediction for this year, I put that Europe will impose capital control before the end of the year. So you will most likely see that once investors understand that Europe is on the verge of this sovereign debt crisis, there will be capital control. So, I mean, my best advice I give to anyone is do not own anything in Europe. Do not own any asset in Europe. Do not have any bank account in a European bank and in Europe, because you will be in trouble.
Just one further note, in Europe. I mean, we're both Europeans, and I've been complaining about this for decades. This trajectory that we've been going down, and the train has been moving to this destination. And I joke, but I'm serious. You had the the late Russian Soviet dissident Vladimir Bukowski give lectures on how the EU is the new European Soviet. There are books, by Germans like Dr. Rath, who's got primary source documents that shows that the roots of Brussels also has it's got Nazi roots, right? Some of the creators of the EU were Nazis, and for that I call it the Fourth Reich, the EU. And as you're saying, I mean, not just EU but UK, Germany. We're seeing journalists being jailed, their bank accounts being shut. Alina Lipp, this German journalist, her parents' bank accounts were shut. They have nothing to do with anything, just thought controls, speech controls, hate crimes. They arrest you at your home because they didn't like your tweet, right? That's right out of George Orwell, where it's thought crime just for thinking. Now you go to jail. This is insane, and it's sad that it's becoming a dictatorship. And you mentioned capital controls. We know Europe has tried to implement this asset registry. They're trying to do this, right? Where you have to, your bicycle, gold, cars, homes, bank accounts. That's something you do before confiscation, as you sort of allude to. And we had Lagarde come out, talk about the digital euro. And this is one of my biggest fears, not just for Europe, but globally. All countries in the world have these pilots projects to implement central bank digital currencies. Mexico has it, United States, the ECB, Russia, China. And my biggest fear, this is one of my biggest fears, is technocracy, where if they get to a certain point, they can just, if they don't like what I say, they can just hit a button and debank me. I've been banned from Patreon. I've been banned from PayPal. What happens when the bank bans me? I have to go forage for food in the forest. What are your thoughts on this digital euro? They said it's going to be activated in October. Some people reported, Richard Werner, the great economist, he recently said that's fake news. It's not going to be activated in October. I think later, but he says still we need to worry about it. What are your thoughts when it comes to central bank digital currencies?
Well, I think that Europe and the ECB is most likely to be the first place to have a CBDC, and as you said, this will be part of the plan to implement capital control, because once everything is tokenized and we have a CBDC, in fact, the implementation of capital control is very easy. So I would think that that's where Europe is going down the road, and it will be the first major country to implement this CBDC. It's undeniable that all country has a CBDC project. I mean, it will probably happen in many countries. That will be very problematic for many people, because I mean, this means that, as you said, you can be debanked by switching a button on or off. My view on this is that's why I mean every investor should own physical asset to protect themselves against reckless government policies. I mean, you never know or which government can implement this reckless policy. It can come at any time from any government. And again, once again, that's why I would think that, I mean, it's a no-brainer that everyone should own some physical gold, physical silver at home, just in case this CBDC appears, and just in case I would say we see some government repression across the world. I mean, I think that for the case, I would think that, as I said, this will probably come everywhere at some point in time. But I would think that the implementation will come first in countries where there is clearly structural problem, and there Europe is probably the first to think about this CBDC. I was also think that Japan is a good candidate to implement a CBDC because I mean it's well known that Japanese investors have used the carry trades and the cheap yen to, I would say, to get yield overseas. So I mean, it's not well documented, but I think that Japan also has a very dire fiscal situation in terms of the government debt. And I could see also a country like Japan imposing CBDCs maybe after Europe.
You write also about Bitcoin and crypto. Just what are your essential thoughts when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto?
Well, Bitcoin is not an anti-fragile asset. It's a trading tool. I mean, it's a speculative tool. I have a lot of doubts about who created Bitcoin, who is really this Satoshi Nakamoto. I don't believe in fairy tale, so I will have my own doubt. But at the end of the day, I look at Bitcoin and how it behaves against other financial assets, and it behaves like high beta financial asset like Nasdaq or like in fact Bitcoin and the triple Nasdaq ETF evolve in the same direction. So I mean, it's a trading tool. It has probably been created for people to get customized with digital currency. So I would say my contrarian view would think that this has been created to like an appetizer for CBDCs, but we will see.
That's so funny you say that. From the beginning, this has been my thesis, and it has not changed. I believe that it was, and exactly as you have stated it, I believe that it was created as an appetizer for the road to CBDCs. So we agree here.
No, I think that I mean, everyone who has a minimum of common sense can see this, right? I mean, Bitcoin came from nowhere. I mean, was get this time of glory during the COVID time. Is when the government promoted a digital payment, a QR code, and everything. So, I mean, too many coincidences to tell me that. This is not that CBDC and Bitcoins are not unrelated. I think they are related. And in fact, I mean, as I said, I don't really care if Bitcoin go to 1 million or zero, but what I know is that over the past centuries, gold has never gone to zero and will never go to zero because everyone will always recognize physical gold as the ultimate store of value. So Bitcoin is at best a trading or a speculative tool. At worst, it's an appetizer to the CBDCs.
Quick thoughts on inflation. I've been worried for the longest time. I've been using the term neo-feudalism. We've heard about the Great Reset, this talk of essentially this neo-feudalism or neo-techno-feudalism. You've had people like Yanis Varoufakis and others speak to this. Joel Kotkin talks about neo-feudalism and this seeming sort of attack globally on the middle class. And I think one of the consequences can be this reversion to feudalism, the Middle Ages, where there's only two classes, the rich and poor. I see it in many countries. Housing is increasingly becoming unattainable for full-time, young professionals, middle class. As we talked about earlier, goods, food is increasing. Wages just aren't really moving. So people are just generally being slowly priced out of everything. So thoughts on inflation?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, inflation is also a tax. And inflation is good for the asset owner and bad for those who don't own assets. So clearly, it increased the divide between the have and the have-not. And for government, it's a way of defaulting as well, because by inflating, in fact, never forget that the government issue a bond at 100 and it's reimbursed 20 years later at 100. And if you have inflation down the road, the $100 you get back 20 years later are clearly not worth $100 anymore. So I guess that inflation is used by many governments in the West as a way to it's a soft default on their debt. And again, here, if I look at what's happening in the East, I mean, there is inflation everywhere, but clearly in the global South, the inflation rate, the inflation shock that we saw after COVID in the Western world has not been so bad in the eastern part of the world or in the global South. So I think here that I would say at least the governments of the global South are still trying to give their middle class a decent chance to get a decent standard of living, which is no more the case in the Western world. I mean, people can say that some governments in the global South are autocratic. I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole, but I would think that at least what I see here in Asia is that everyone still has his chance to start his own business, and with inflation being kept under control, of course, there are still a lot of subsidies given to the population in terms of energy prices or even food prices. But it's a way, I would say, to keep the middle class afloat when in the Western world, clearly the governments have gone down the rabbit hole of inflation because, as I said, it's a way for them to kind of implement a soft default on their government debt.
I want to go back to war before we close out. You mentioned the EU in particular seems to be the biggest warmonger. And I listen to voices from different languages and cultures, Croatian as well. And a number of, at least two former Croatian military men have said that basically they're going to take Europe and throw it at Russia again for the third time, right? Napoleon, Hitler. And then again, they're just going to take Europe and throw it at the East. Meanwhile, we see the US and Israel gearing up for war with Iran, and Washington also preparing to pivot to the Indo-Pacific theater. Their vassals, South Korea, Philippines, Japan, they're trying to arm them and prepare them to be the first cannon fodder for any conflict with China. So just on this idea of a third world war, what are your thoughts there? Do you think it can be diffused, or it'll be more of a limited conflict to certain regions, or do you see the potential for it to expand to something wider? Zelensky said they found Chinese troops now in Donetsk, and then again that can be signal for trying. Some parties who are interested attempting to expand this. Just thoughts on a major military conflict.
Well, I could speak about this for an hour, but I'm trying to get it short. I think that, as I said, when governments are desperate, they use war because it's the way to unite their country and their people. I mean, if you create a foreign adversary, you don't talk about the problems at home. And so that's why I think that we are on the verge of an escalation in the conflict in Europe between Russia and NATO, or the European members of NATO. So I think that Europe needs this war because the European leaders need to divert the attention of their economic problems to something else. Looking at the Middle East, unfortunately, I think that we are going into a period of much more trouble. And clearly, Iran here is in the spotlight. I think that, the support of the US to Israel seems unconditional, even under America First policy. So I would think that, unfortunately, the US will embark on another Middle East war with Iran. I mean, Iran has a strategic partnership with Russia, so indirectly this would be also kind of a war with Russia. And then if I move to Asia, in fact, I find that quite surprising that, again, even Trump is speaking about America first, but he keeps, I would say, weaponizing the Korean Peninsula. And I'm really worried about kind of a new conflict emerging in the Korean Peninsula, because that would be a new proxy war between the West and the global South, in a way that you have a political instability in South Korea. So here, once again, it's very easy for the warmongers to trigger a conflict on the Korean Peninsula. I mean, remember, Zelensky also said he found a North Korean in Donetsk. Now he said that he found Chinese fighting in Donetsk. So I guess that it's part of the plan to try to push China into a conflict that China doesn't want. I mean, China has no imperialistic views. I mean, I don't remember the last time that China invaded another country. It was centuries ago. And as I said, China has never imposed a political regime to a country like the West did all the time in the recent past since World War II. So I would think that, unfortunately, the elite in power in Europe are thirsty for war. And I'm still very difficult to understand, because Trump say he's against war, but on the other hand, he support Israel in strike against Iran. And the US keeps delivering weapons to South Korea and Japan in a way to militarize the East Asia or the Pacific region. So I'm not sure really if I understand well Trump when he say that he's against war, or is he just opportunistic? And here, what I want to highlight maybe is that I think Trump understood that this bloc of China, Russia, and India cannot be beaten, and is the major threat to the American and the Western dominance of the world. So what he's trying to do in Ukraine is he's trying to bring back Russia in the West's camp, and he's trying to offer a carrot to Russia as a way to end the conflict in Ukraine. But I think that the problem that he doesn't understand is that the trust of Russian leaders with the West has been broken. I mean, we all know that Merkel said that the Minsk agreement was just an agreement to buy time to increase the military of Ukraine. So I guess that Russian leaders are not stupid anymore. They won't fall in the trap that is here and proposed by Donald Trump for peace in Ukraine. And on the other hand, since 2022, the relationship with between Russia and China has dramatically improved. And as I said, I mean, it's maybe a conclusion. And again, I come back to this combination of Russia, China, and India. You have cheap commodities in Russia. You have kind of a state-of-the-art manufacturing capability in China. And then in India, you have a new consumerist market. If you combine these three countries which have sizable demographic size, I mean, they can easily dominate the world. And that's why I think that what a lot of countries in ASEAN and also in Latin America have started to understand is that they better be friends with these three countries and try to benefit from the growth of these three countries rather than to look to please the Western world.
What you said on Korea, it's funny. We're so much on the same frequency. For my paid subscriber analysis, I take the news every week, and for an hour or two, I just kind of give my commentary and go around the world, what I think is most interesting or important. And I mentioned South Korea. New York Times did a recent piece talking about how South Korean democracy is faltering, and precisely what you said. It's like a wound that's festering, which the West can press on. To make a Korean War 2.0, right, situation, a flashpoint, that if they want, the war can start there, and then it can expand to the rest of Asia and China. So exactly, I said that a few days ago, exactly as you said, that that's one flashpoint that can be used. And many, the president who was, I think, impeached recently of South Korea, it seems what he tried to do was implement martial law and perhaps stage a false flag for war with North Korea, and that would have been at the behest of the West. And thankfully, he didn't succeed. So we'll just have to keep our eyes peeled. I guess one of my last questions, and we've covered the waterfront. I didn't know what to expect from the Macro Butler, and I think it's been a fantastic, exceeded my expectations for this discussion. Given everything with the topics we've treated, what can individuals sort of do? Just some key tips to survive and thrive. And I take it, stick with gold and hard assets. Any tips here?
Well, I think that it's important to stay healthy because health is wealth. So I think also it's important for everyone to have to be cold-minded and to go back to the basic. Spend a lot of time with your loved ones. Take care of your loved ones first is the most important things in life after health. And in terms of investment, I would think that they need to go back to the basic of all our ancestors invested, meaning that most of their portfolio should be in physical assets, and they need to look at where they want, I would say, to settle down in terms of which country, which region, and weight the geopolitical risk of every country. What looks safe today could be unsafe tomorrow. We don't really know how geopolitics will evolve and which country will move on which side of the trade battle. I would look for countries that are more neutral by historically, and countries that have historically tried to stay away of taking a side in any conflict. I would look to settle down in a country where you can get easy access to food domestically, where you can have easy access to manufacturing goods domestically, because I think that in the next few months and years, we will see even more disruption of supply chain. So I would think that local supply chains will be very valuable to stay wealthy and to have a comfortable life. And I would always look for a plan B in life, meaning that I would not put all my eggs in one single basket, and I would look at different plan where you can easily relocate in case of something is turning sour I would say, in your plan A country.
Really good stuff, Macro Butler. All of your links are in the description, but again, if you want to tell us where are the best places, your projects and best places for people to find you.
Well, they can Google the Macro Butler. I'm on Substack. I write a weekly free newsletter. For more, I would say, dynamic comments about everything from geopolitics to financial market, they can look for me on LinkedIn and on X. I mean, if they are interested, they also can contact me at info@themacrobutler.com. And I mean, I'm happy to answer email, to discuss any matters that we touch during this fantastic discussion.
All right, good stuff. Follow Lawrence everywhere, and merci for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you very much. Gracias.